His laugh echoed through the courtroom like a knife twisting in my chest. Brendan actually laughed. Right there. In front of the judge. In front of everyone. My husband of 8 years leaned over and whispered, just for me to hear, "You'll be lucky to see the kids twice a month," supervised. I am Aelia Selenas. I was 34 years old when my entire world collapsed in a California courtroom. Married for 8 years. Mother to Marisol, 7, and Theo, almost 6. And suddenly, I had nothing. No home, no children, no savings. Nothing except the clothes I was wearing and a used Toyota that sounded like it was auditioning for a horror movie every time I turned the key. I remember the day Brendan walked into my life. I was 25, working as a medical billing specialist, proud of my steady, honest work. My parents, immigrants who had worked their whole lives, taught me that honesty, hard work, and keeping your head down were all you needed in America. Brendan, charming and ambitious, climbed fast at a tech company in San Diego. Fancy dinners, weekend trips, whispered promises that I was the woman he had been searching for. By the time I was 26, we were married. Marisol arrived a year later, Theo 2 years after that. Life was perfect, or so I thought. When the kids were little, Brendan suggested I cut back on work, go part-time, focus on the family. I trusted him. I thought we were building a life together. I managed the household, raised our children, supported his career. But behind my back, Brendan had been planning my downfall long before Theo was born. He gave me an allowance, a fixed amount for groceries, kids, gas, everything. Need more? I had to justify it. I never questioned it because I trusted him. I had been raised in a household where my father managed the money. I assumed this was just how marriages worked. I was a fool, a complete, total fool. Then came the divorce papers. Not at home, where I could process the news in private, not in the mail. No, Brendan had a process server hand them to me in front of everyone at my workplace. Maximum humiliation. My coworkers saw it all. That should have been the first red flag, but I was still blind. Court was worse. Brendan's lawyer painted me as mentally unstable, neglectful, incapable of caring for my children. Every exhausted human moment I experienced as a mother, forgotten permission slips, tired tears at school events, moments of distraction, was twisted into evidence. Every mistake, every lapse, meticulously documented. And he wasn't working alone. Constance Holloway, his mother, smiled at me across holiday dinners, while secretly gathering proof against me. She photographed my messy kitchen, my tired face, my unfolded laundry. She documented everything. Too much vitamin D in the sunrise? Too orange? Too slow? Not enough. Everything was a weapon, and the betrayal that cut deepest didn't come from Brendan or his mother. It came from my own sister, Paloma. My baby sister, the one I had protected our whole childhood. She testified that I was overwhelmed, short-tempered, incapable. I later found out she'd been dating one of Brendan's colleagues. She chose her new life over family loyalty. I was left with a court-appointed lawyer, overmatched and under-resourced. Brendan's temporary custody order gave him everything: our children, our family home, our life together. I had to find a new place to live, start over from nothing. I moved into a studio apartment so small I had to step outside to change my mind. The listing probably called it cozy and efficient. Reality? 1 room, 1 window, a shower over the toilet. My life, condensed into 250 square feet of despair. But even in that court hearing, a tiny seed of suspicion was planted. Brendan's financial disclosure showed an income of $140,000 per year. But I remembered conversations, bonuses, stock options, a lifestyle that didn't match those numbers. My gut told me something was wrong. The days that followed were darker than anything I had ever experienced. Brendan weaponized visitation. Every pickup turned into a battle. "Marisol has a stomachache, maybe next weekend," he'd say. "Theo has a playdate, maybe next weekend." The children changed. Marisol, once chatty, now distant. Theo, crying, asking why Mommy left them. I already knew the answer. Brendan was erasing me, rewriting our family story one bedtime at a time. Constance Holloway posted every victory online. #Grandma of the Year, #blessed, #family first. Paloma appeared there too, smiling in my kitchen, playing with my children. Gifts, trips, new cars. All while I worked double shifts, sold my grandmother's bracelet, skipped meals just to survive. Brendan had also ruined my credit, opening credit cards in my name, maxing them out, and letting them go unpaid. My present was gone, my future sabotaged, and just when I thought I could catch my breath, a new supervisor appeared at work, Regina Doyle. She was about to enter my story in a way I could never have imagined, but that, my friends, is where part 2 begins. When Regina Doyle arrived as my new supervisor, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. I barely had the energy to care about anyone at work. Between double shifts at the hospital, sleepless nights in my tiny studio, and the constant worry about my children, I had become a ghost of myself. My coworkers had noticed, yes, but how could they know the depth of my collapse? How could anyone see past the surface? Regina, though, she saw something. Something that wasn't broken but buried. She didn't ask nosy questions about Brendan or the divorce. She didn't make judgments about my tired eyes or disheveled uniform. She simply observed, and when the moment was right, she offered help in ways that didn't feel like charity. "Hey, Aelia," she said one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe of the billing department. "You're good at your job. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I know you've had a rough patch, but I see potential, and I know how to fight for people like you." Her words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds I didn't realize had been hanging over me for months. I nodded, unsure if I was ready to believe her, but a seed of hope planted itself. Meanwhile, Brendan and Constance Holloway were relentless. Every visitation turned into a chess game. Sometimes the kids weren't home when I arrived. Sometimes they were asleep, too tired to talk. Sometimes they whispered things I didn't want to hear, words fed to them by someone who had decided I was the villain in their story. "Mommy doesn't want you," Theo asked one night as I tucked him into bed, his tiny hands clutching mine. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I cried every night. But I also began to notice something, a flicker of resilience. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief, humiliation, and exhaustion, I realized I wasn't finished yet. Brendan might have taken my home, my children, my money, but he hadn't taken me. Not completely. Not yet. It started small. I organized my finances, however little I had. I created a strict budget for my meager paycheck. I sold what I could. My grandmother's bracelet had been the first sacrifice, but there were other items, small things that could help me scrape by. I worked extra shifts, sometimes 12 hours straight, my body screaming in protest. My mind, however, was sharper than it had been in years. That nagging suspicion from the courtroom, the discrepancy in Brendan's income, refused to let me rest. $140,000? That couldn't be right. Too low for the lifestyle he flaunted, too low for the bonuses and stock options he bragged about in private conversations. I began digging, slowly, meticulously. Every document, every financial record I could access, every detail Brendan and his lawyer had tried to conceal. It became my silent obsession. Regina noticed, of course. "You're relentless," she said one evening as I printed another set of hospital billing reports. "Not a lot of people can turn trauma into this kind of focus. You're going to need allies if you want to fight him legally. And you will need to fight him legally." She didn't know everything yet. She didn't know about Paloma's betrayal, Constance's manipulations, or the way Brendan had poisoned my children against me. But she could see my determination, and that, she said, was enough. With her encouragement, I started to strategize. I contacted legal aid organizations, looking for anyone who could help me challenge Brendan's custody arrangement. I started documenting everything, every missed visitation, every lie fed to my children, every expense I had covered for them despite the court orders. I also started noticing patterns. Brendan was meticulous, almost robotic, in how he manipulated the system. But where he was methodical, I realized, he was predictable. Every motion he filed, every delay he caused, every temporary victory he celebrated online, it followed a pattern. And patterns, I thought, are meant to be studied, understood, and ultimately defeated. The first small victories were intoxicating: a missed court filing on his lawyer's part, a clerical error in the financial disclosure. Each little win reminded me that the world was not entirely stacked against me. There were cracks in his armor, and I was determined to find them all. At home, life remained brutal. My studio apartment felt like a cage. The walls, thin and gray, echoed with the memories of what I had lost. Nights were long, lonely, and cold. Yet every morning I woke up and reminded myself, "You are still a mother. You are still Aelia Selenas, and you will not let them erase you." And slowly, my children began to show signs of recognition, little sparks of memory that we were still connected. Marisol asked me to read her favorite bedtime story one night, not from a tablet, but from the pages we had shared for years. Theo hugged me without asking, whispering, "I missed you, Mommy." Those moments, fleeting as they were, became fuel for my fight. Regina became more than a supervisor. She became a mentor, a strategist, a partner in planning. She helped me navigate workplace politics, offered emotional support, and occasionally reminded me that survival was the first step toward victory. Then came the first real clue, a document Brendan's lawyer had carelessly left in a stack of court papers. A small folder, hidden in plain sight, revealing investments, bonuses, and side income that he had failed to disclose. My heart raced. Finally, the piece of evidence that could turn everything around. It was a beginning. Not the end, but a beginning. And I knew that if I could just hold on, keep pushing, keep strategizing, I might have a chance, not only to see my children more often, but to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. But Brendan would not go down without a fight, and he had more tricks up his sleeve than I could yet imagine. The fight was just starting, and the next move would decide everything. The folder Brendan's lawyer had left behind was small, almost laughably insignificant, but it felt like a bomb in my hands. For months, I had been drowning in court orders, financial delays, and parental isolation. And here it was, the first real piece of evidence that Brendan's carefully constructed facade was not as solid as he thought. I sat on the edge of my bed in my tiny studio apartment, flipping through each page with trembling fingers. Investment accounts I didn't know existed, bonus checks that never appeared in the official disclosure, stock options hidden behind shell corporations. It was a financial web, intricate and insidious, but it was there, and it was mine to unravel. Regina's voice echoed in my memory. Patterns can be studied, understood, and defeated. I had spent weeks watching Brendan's behavior, cataloging every delay, every excuse, every manipulation. I had documented the missed visitations, the sudden illnesses, the inexplicable school events that always seemed to leave my children in his control. And now, the finances, the hidden income, added a new layer to my strategy. I started with small steps: copies of bank statements, court documents, receipts, anything that could expose discrepancies. I stayed late at work, printing, scanning, organizing. My nights blurred together, little sleep, little food, constant anxiety, but my focus sharpened. Every detail mattered. Every missed disclosure, every lie told in court, every manipulated social media post became a thread I could pull. Brendan, of course, had no idea. He was confident, too confident. Over the next few weeks, I observed him carefully. His public persona, the charming father, the successful tech executive, was just that, a persona. Behind closed doors, he was calculating, cruel, and obsessed with control. He continued to post pictures online, happy family outings with Constance and Paloma smiling in the background, reinforcing the narrative that I was an absent, negligent mother. But I had Regina, and her insight was invaluable. She helped me think like a lawyer, plan like a strategist, and remain steady even when the emotional weight threatened to crush me. "Don't fight him emotionally," she said one evening as we reviewed my notes. "That's his game. Fight him logically, fact by fact, document by document. Expose the inconsistencies. You have a weapon, use it." And so I did. I started building a case, piece by piece. Every missed court-ordered visitation, every contradictory statement Brendan had made, every instance of financial manipulation. The folder from his lawyer was just the beginning. Over the next month, I discovered credit card statements he had hidden, payments for personal luxuries disguised as household expenses, and even attempts to funnel money into accounts under Constance's name. I also began noticing changes in my children. It was subtle at first, small comments from Marisol, hesitations from Theo, but they were cracks in Brendan's propaganda. One evening, Marisol said quietly, "Mommy, can we read the story you used to read at bedtime? Not the tablet." And Theo, holding my hand tightly, whispered, "I missed you, Mommy." These moments reminded me why I couldn't give up, but the emotional manipulation was relentless. Constance posted daily updates on social media, painting herself as the perfect grandmother, Paloma as the ideal sister, and me as the distant, ineffective mother. Every post felt like a taunt, a reminder of what I had lost. I had to ignore it, even as it gnawed at my heart. Regina encouraged me to stay organized. We created timelines of events, cross-referenced financial records, and logged every interaction with Brendan and his family. It was exhausting, but it was empowering. For the first time since the divorce, I felt a flicker of control. Then came the first real breakthrough. One evening, as I sifted through emails from Brendan's corporate accounts that I had legally obtained through discovery, I found internal memos discussing bonuses, stock options, and unreported income streams. It confirmed my suspicion. The $140,000 annual income he had disclosed in court was a lie. A massive, deliberate lie designed to make me appear destitute and unfit, while he retained the life we had built together. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just about money, it was about the truth. If I could prove this, I could challenge the entire custody arrangement. Brendan had played a long game, but I had found a weakness. But of course, he wouldn't make it easy. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes. Subtle monitoring of my visits, attempts to discredit me further with teachers and neighbors, even social media posts that seemed designed to provoke me into a reaction. Brendan was clever, but predictable, and I was ready. One night, after a particularly grueling double shift, I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers, screenshots, and receipts. Exhaustion threatened to consume me, but determination kept me anchored. I whispered to myself, "I will not be erased. Not my children, not my story, not my life." That resolve was tested the very next day. During a scheduled visitation pickup, Brendan arrived with a smirk, as usual. But this time he tried something different, subtle psychological manipulation. He praised Marisol for being quiet and obedient, contrasted it with gentle digs at me. He asked Theo loaded questions about me, insinuating that I was unreliable, that I wasn't trying hard enough. I remained calm. I documented every word, every action. I knew that in this game, every moment could be used as evidence, every lie exposed through careful record-keeping. Back at my apartment, Regina helped me review the documents I had uncovered. "This is your leverage," she said. "You found the cracks. Now you make them wider." And I realized, for the first time in months, that I had power. Not brute power, not the power Brendan had taken from me through money and manipulation, but the power of truth, of preparation, and of relentless focus. I would fight. I would reclaim my children. I would expose Brendan for the man he truly was. And I wouldn't stop until justice, not revenge, but justice, was served. But little did I know, Brendan had his own surprises waiting. He had underestimated me for 8 years, and underestimation, I realized, could be fatal. Aelia's tiny apartment had become a war room. Papers, receipts, court documents, and emails were strewn across the floor, covering every surface. My life had shrunk into this one room, but within its walls I was planning my comeback. Every detail mattered, Every piece of evidence could be a weapon. Brendan, of course, sensed that I was no longer passive. His behavior began to change, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it didn't escape my notice. More surveillance during visitations, extra questions for teachers, whispered comments to neighbors about my unstable state. Every action felt orchestrated, as if he could sense my small victories and wanted to crush them before they grew. Then came the first confrontation. It was a Saturday, one of the rare days I was supposed to pick up Marisol and Theo. I arrived at the house, my heart racing, clutching my folder of documents like armor. Brendan opened the door, smiling too brightly, his eyes cold. "Hey," he said, "kids are with Constance today. Maybe next weekend?" I froze, forcing myself to remain calm. "Brendan," I said evenly, "you know the court order. They are supposed to be with me today." He shrugged, that infuriating, practiced shrug. "Well, life happens. Maybe we can reschedule." I could feel the fury building inside me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook. "I've been documenting everything," I said softly. "Every missed visitation, every excuse. I'm keeping track of all of it, and when the judge sees this, you won't be able to explain it away." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. The man who had been so confident, so untouchable, hesitated. He was testing me, seeing how much I had discovered, trying to intimidate me into backing down. It worked, only partially, because I didn't back down. Back at my apartment, I pored over financial documents, cross-referencing statements, emails, and receipts. I found more hidden accounts, transfers to family members, and unexplained purchases. Brendan had been meticulous, but meticulous doesn't mean infallible. Every carefully concealed transaction became a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. I also started reaching out to allies, teachers, neighbors, anyone who could provide testimony about my relationship with the children. Small steps, but essential. I couldn't afford a full legal team, but I could build credibility, one voice at a time. Then came the emotional blow, a message from Paloma. I didn't open it immediately. My hands shook. After everything, her betrayal in court, her smiling photos on social media with my children, I had almost convinced myself I didn't care anymore. But curiosity won. The message was short, simple, calculated. "Mommy, it's not all black and white. Maybe you should let go." I stared at it for a long time. Let go? Let go of my children? Let go of everything I had fought for? I realized that Paloma wasn't just betraying me for Brendan. She was trying to manipulate me, to guilt me into surrendering. But I refused. I couldn't let her, or anyone, make me feel powerless again. Regina helped me process the emotions. "Family loyalty is complicated," she said. "But you have your children. That's your priority. Don't let anyone else rewrite your story for you." And so I doubled down. Every hour of work, every night of research, every document scanned and logged, it was all for them. My children, my future, my dignity. Then, a breakthrough that would change everything. A pattern emerged in Brendan's financial statements. Payments to Constance, transfers to accounts under Paloma's name, large expenses that weren't reported in court. He had been hiding substantial wealth to appear less capable financially. That meant two things. First, he had been lying under oath. Second, it gave me leverage. Real leverage. I began drafting a legal motion, detailing the discrepancies, the hidden accounts, the repeated misrepresentations. I compiled screenshots of social media posts, witness statements, and visitation logs. Each piece reinforced the narrative that Brendan and his allies were manipulating not just the legal system, but my children, to isolate me. But Brendan, as always, had a counter. He escalated. Threatening emails, intimidating phone calls, attempts to create conflict with my supervisor, even subtle threats to my landlord, who had already tolerated months of my meager rent payments. It was psychological warfare, and he was skilled. Yet for every attack I found a defense, for every obstacle a workaround. I realized that Brendan had underestimated me, again. He thought a small allowance, social manipulation, and courtroom intimidation could keep me subdued. But I was awake now. Every betrayal had hardened me. Every sleepless night had sharpened my mind. And then, the moment that truly tested my resolve, a call from my children. "Mommy, why can't I come to you?" Marisol asked, her voice small and fragile. Theo cried in the background. I felt my heart shatter all over again, but I also felt something else. Fury. Protective, righteous fury. I hung up and stared at the wall of my apartment. This wasn't just about finances or court documents or legal battles. This was about my children's hearts, and I would not lose them. Not to lies, not to manipulation, not to anyone. Regina looked at me that evening and said, "Aelia, the fight is going to get worse. He knows you're gaining ground. He's going to push back harder. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath. I don't have a choice. I have to be ready. Because I realized then that Brendan wasn't just fighting to keep custody. He was fighting to erase me, and I would fight to reclaim everything he had stolen. My children, my dignity, my life. And this fight? It was only beginning. The first court hearing after my discovery of Brendan's hidden income felt like stepping into a battlefield with no armor. I was exhausted, financially drained, and emotionally fragile. But for the first time in months, I had a weapon, the truth, and I was determined to wield it. Regina and I arrived early, my documents organized into neat, color-coded folders. Every page, every email, every bank statement meticulously labeled. I had spent nights cross-referencing numbers, noting inconsistencies, highlighting transfers, and documenting patterns of deceit. Every detail was accounted for. Every lie was recorded. Brendan was already there, confident as ever, smiling at the court staff, charming his lawyer, and glancing at me with that same look he had perfected over 8 years, arrogance laced with contempt. I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay steady. The hearing began. Brendan's lawyer spoke first, spinning the same narrative he had used before. I was unstable, distracted, and incapable of caring for my children. But when it was my turn, I presented the evidence I had collected. Every hidden account, every unreported bonus, every suspicious transfer. I documented how Brendan had misrepresented his income to the court, all while controlling my access to my children. The judge's expression shifted. Interest, surprise, skepticism. I pressed on, describing how my children had been subtly manipulated, how Marisol and Theo had begun to question my intentions because of Brendan's influence, and how social media posts had been weaponized against me. Brendan's smirk faltered slightly. I saw the first cracks in his armor. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Constance Holloway's face tightened, Paloma avoided eye contact, and Brendan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I felt a surge of strength. For the first time in months, I realized I wasn't completely powerless. I could fight back, and maybe, just maybe, I could win. But the fight wasn't over yet. Brendan escalated his tactics immediately after the hearing. Emails, texts, calls designed to intimidate me, distract me, and wear me down. "Be careful what you post," he wrote one evening. "People are watching. You don't want to make mistakes." I ignored him, focused on the next steps, documenting, filing, preparing. Every small victory became a shield against his psychological attacks, and yet, the emotional toll was undeniable. My nights were filled with memories of my children, longing for their laughter, their hugs, their smiles. Marisol's quiet question one night, "Mommy, why don't we live together anymore?" echoed in my mind. Theo's tears, his tiny hands clutching mine, reminded me of what I was fighting for. I found solace in small victories, a teacher agreeing to testify that I had always been involved and attentive, a neighbor confirming my constant presence in the children's lives. Each voice, each statement, became a building block in the foundation I was creating to reclaim my family. Regina's support was unwavering. She helped me anticipate Brendan's moves, advised on court etiquette, and reminded me to remain calm, logical, and strategic. "Don't let emotions dictate your actions," she said. "Use the evidence, stay focused. You're stronger than you think." And I was learning. Every challenge, every insult, every attempt to discredit me only fueled my determination. Brendan had thought he could erase me. He had thought he could rewrite my story and isolate me from my children. But I was not finished. The next hearing approached, and the tension was unbearable. I had spent weeks preparing, reviewing every document, rehearsing my statements, and anticipating every argument Brendan might make. I was ready, or as ready as I could be. The day arrived. The courtroom was packed, a mix of family, lawyers, and court staff. Brendan arrived, exuding confidence, while Constance and Paloma sat behind him like shadows, silently supporting his narrative. I took my seat, clutching my folders, heart pounding, hands trembling. The hearing began, and Brendan's lawyer attacked as expected, questioning my stability, my work schedule, and my parenting. But when it was my turn, I presented everything I had compiled. Hidden income, financial manipulation, social media evidence, documented visitations, and statements from witnesses who could attest to my consistent involvement in my children's lives. The courtroom fell silent. The judge listened intently, flipping through pages of evidence, eyes narrowing as discrepancies became clear. Brendan's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by tension. Even his lawyer seemed unsettled. It was the first real shift in power. I felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny, fragile thing, but hope nonetheless. For the first time, I saw the possibility of regaining not just custody, but dignity. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the cold California air, my body trembling from adrenaline. Regina was beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder. "This is just the beginning," she said. "But you did it. You showed them who you really are, and that matters." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel a spark of triumph amidst the devastation. Brendan had underestimated me, and that underestimation could be his undoing. But I knew the fight was far from over. He would not surrender easily. He had power, money, and influence, but I had something stronger: truth, determination, and the unyielding love for my children, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Just when I thought the first courtroom victory had shifted the balance, Brendan escalated. It wasn't enough for him to control the children or manipulate their perception of me. He wanted to break me completely. The first sign came in the form of emails and messages, thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. "Be careful what you post online," he wrote. "People are watching. Missteps have consequences." Each message felt like a punch to the chest. He knew I was documenting everything, and he wanted to intimidate me into stopping. Then came the manipulations closer to home. My tiny studio apartment suddenly felt unsafe. Strange knocks on the door at odd hours. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. A neighbor mentioned seeing a man loitering outside. My anxiety spiked. Brendan's control extended beyond the courtroom. Even my work life became a battlefield. Rumors circulated at the hospital, subtly aimed at undermining my professionalism. I suspected Brendan's network had reached beyond our family, trying to isolate me socially and professionally. It was relentless. Every step forward felt like a battle uphill, but I refused to crumble. Regina's presence became more essential than ever. She helped me strategize, teaching me to remain composed and documenting every attack, every message, every suspicious occurrence. She reminded me that Brendan thrived on emotional reactions. "Stay logical," she said. "Let the evidence speak for you." I began to notice patterns in his attacks. Every attempt to intimidate me followed predictable timing, before court dates, after successful visitations, or when I had begun to gain momentum. These attacks, while exhausting, revealed his desperation. He had always been confident, untouchable, but now he was reacting. And that reaction, I realized, was a sign of weakness. The children became the hardest part. Every visit with Marisol and Theo was laced with tension. Brendan subtly coached them to doubt me, whispering stories designed to make them feel I had abandoned them. "Mommy doesn't want you right now," Theo repeated one day, his voice small and confused. I fought back gently, with patience and love, but it broke my heart to see the tiny seeds of doubt planted by someone I had trusted to love our children. Despite all of this, I refused to retreat. I spent late nights compiling evidence, financial documents, visitation records, screenshots of social media manipulation, and statements from teachers and neighbors. Each document was another arrow in my quiver, a potential tool to counter Brendan's lies and deception. Then came the breakthrough moment. While reviewing financial records, I noticed an unusual pattern of transfers to Constance's accounts. It was subtle, hidden in layers of legitimate transactions, but I could see it. Brendan had been funneling money through her to hide assets and maintain the illusion of a modest lifestyle. My heart raced. This wasn't just evidence, it was proof of deliberate deceit, and it could change the course of the custody battle. With Regina's help, I prepared a detailed report, cross-referencing every transfer, every account, every suspicious transaction. I organized it for presentation in court, ensuring it would be impossible to ignore. But Brendan sensed the threat. He escalated further. During visitations, he attempted subtle provocations to undermine my credibility. He questioned me in front of the children, made offhand comments about my work schedule, and even tried to influence teachers against me. His confidence was faltering, but his tactics became more aggressive, more personal, more insidious. It was during one particularly brutal week that I truly realized the magnitude of the fight. After a visitation where Theo had cried inconsolably and Marisol had withdrawn into herself, I collapsed in my apartment. Exhaustion, fear, and frustration threatened to overwhelm me. I felt completely alone, betrayed by my sister, attacked by my ex-husband, and powerless to fully protect my children. But then I remembered something Regina had said. "You are stronger than you think. Every challenge is an opportunity to prepare, to strategize, to fight smarter." And so, I stood up. I began documenting everything meticulously. Each missed court-mandated visitation, every subtle manipulation, every financial discrepancy, every social media post designed to distort reality. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was building a narrative, a story that could prove my dedication as a mother and expose Brendan's lies for what they truly were. I also started to prepare my own witnesses, teachers, neighbors, friends who had observed my consistent care for Marisol and Theo. Their voices, once passive, now became part of my arsenal. Each statement, each observation, strengthened the case I was building. And in the quiet moments, when exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole, I reminded myself why I was fighting. It wasn't just for custody, or even for financial fairness. It was for my children's hearts, for the love I had built over 8 years, for the mother I refused to let Brendan erase. By the end of that week, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Brendan was powerful, ruthless, and manipulative, but he had underestimated me. Every attempt to intimidate me, every psychological maneuver, every hidden account I uncovered, was evidence that he had relied too heavily on control and fear. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about surviving, it was about reclaiming everything that had been stolen, my children, my dignity, my life. And I was ready. The next hearing was approaching, and I knew it would be decisive. I had built a foundation of evidence, witnesses, and strategy. I had endured attacks on every front, legal, emotional, and psychological, and I was no longer afraid. Brendan had made the first move, but I was prepared for the next, and this time, I intended to win. The day of the next hearing arrived with a weight I could feel pressing down on my chest. Months of planning, documenting, and strategizing had led to this moment. My folder of evidence was thick, every page meticulously organized, every discrepancy highlighted. This was more than just a legal battle. It was my life, my children, and my chance to reclaim what had been stolen from me. I took a deep breath as I entered the courtroom. Brendan was already there, his smug expression carefully curated, as if nothing could touch him. Behind him, Constance and Paloma sat like silent sentinels, smiling politely but with eyes that betrayed tension. Even his lawyer seemed less confident than before. Regina was beside me, a steady presence in the storm. "Remember," she whispered, "stay calm. Facts, not emotions. Let the evidence speak." The hearing began. Brendan's lawyer tried the usual tactics, painting me as unstable, distracted, and incapable. But this time, I was ready. I had the documents, the witness statements, the financial records. I had spent nights rehearsing, memorizing key points, anticipating every argument. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly, clearly, deliberately. I presented the evidence of Brendan's hidden income, the undisclosed accounts, the unreported bonuses. I explained how financial misrepresentation had painted a false picture of my financial dependency and manipulated the court's perception of my ability to care for my children. I detailed the subtle ways Brendan had poisoned the children against me, supported by statements from teachers, neighbors, and even friends who had observed interactions during visitations. I showed how social media had been weaponized to distort reality, making me appear absent and disengaged. The judge listened intently, flipping through the documents, occasionally glancing up at Brendan and his family. I could see the tension building. Even Brendan's confident facade began to crack. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Brendan's lawyer attempted to interject, but the weight of the evidence made objections falter. The judge asked pointed questions, seeking clarification on financial discrepancies, visitation logs, and documented interactions. Every answer I gave was precise, calm, and supported by evidence. Brendan's reaction was immediate. His smirk vanished completely. I could see the desperation flicker in his eyes. He tried to regain control, but every move felt forced, reactive. He had relied on intimidation and manipulation for so long, but now, facing irrefutable evidence, he seemed unprepared. Paloma shifted uneasily in her seat, avoiding my gaze. Constance's expression hardened, but it was a mask of composure over visible tension. The power dynamics had shifted, and they both knew it. Outside the courtroom, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Regina gave me a small, encouraging smile. "You did it," she said softly. "This is the first step. The tide is turning." But the battle was far from over. Brendan's attacks escalated immediately after the hearing. Subtle threats, manipulative emails, attempts to discredit me socially and professionally. He even tried to influence neighbors and teachers against me, though by now I had documented everything. Each attack was a reminder that he would not yield easily. The children remained at the center of my worry. Every visit, every interaction with Brendan had the potential to unsettle them further. Marisol's quiet hesitation, Theo's clinginess, it was heartbreaking to witness. Yet, these moments also fueled my determination. I had to fight not just in court, but in their lives, to preserve the bond we shared. Regina helped me navigate these emotional challenges, reminding me to focus on strategy and evidence. "Don't let them manipulate your emotions," she advised. "Your strength is in preparation, in clarity, and in the truth. The children will see that." And slowly, I began to notice small victories outside the courtroom. Marisol asked me to read her favorite bedtime story without the tablet, and Theo hugged me without prompting, whispering, "I missed you, Mommy." These moments, fleeting but precious, reminded me why I was fighting. As weeks passed, I continued to build my case. Financial records, witness statements, and detailed logs of visitations created a comprehensive narrative that exposed Brendan's manipulations. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the illusion he had carefully constructed over years. Then came the breakthrough, a discrepancy so significant that it could not be ignored. An unreported bonus from Brendan's tech company funneled through multiple accounts to hide its existence. It was the smoking gun, proof of deliberate deception. I presented it in the next hearing, and for the first time, I saw the court seriously question Brendan's credibility. Brendan's response was subtle but telling. His lawyer argued, defended, and deflected, but the impact was clear. The court was no longer accepting his narrative at face value. His control was slipping, and desperation began to show. At home, I documented every conversation, every interaction, every subtle attempt to influence the children. Each record strengthened my position, creating a fortress of evidence that Brendan could not easily dismantle. And through it all, Regina remained my anchor. She reminded me that resilience was more than endurance. It was strategy, preparation, and patience. "You're fighting for more than custody," she said one evening. "You're fighting for truth, for your children, for your life. That's a battle worth every ounce of strength." By the end of this part of the journey, I realized something profound. I had survived the first wave of attacks. I had exposed lies, documented deceit, and begun reclaiming control over my life and my children's future. Brendan had underestimated me, and that miscalculation could prove pivotal. But I also knew the fight was far from over. Brendan's next moves would be calculated, aggressive, and potentially ruthless. And I had to be ready for anything. After the last hearing, I knew Brendan was desperate. His once calm, controlled demeanor had cracked. I could see it in the courtroom, in the way he avoided my gaze, and in the subtle, almost frantic energy he carried. He was losing ground, and with every misstep, my chance to reclaim my life and my children grew. But desperation is dangerous. Brendan didn't just escalate legally, he became more insidious. Emails, subtle threats, and attempts to discredit me in both my personal and professional life became routine. He questioned my work ethic to supervisors, tried to plant doubt among neighbors, and even attempted to create tension between me and my small circle of friends. Every move was calculated to destabilize me, to make me doubt myself, to make me look unfit to the court. Regina noticed immediately. "He's panicking," she said, reviewing my latest documentation. "And when someone panics, they make mistakes. That's where we'll find the opening." And she was right. It started with an email I almost overlooked. A mistakenly sent internal memo from Brendan's company detailing a bonus he had claimed was non-existent. My pulse raced as I read it, recognizing the potential impact immediately. Not only did it prove that Brendan had lied about his income, but it also opened the door to question his financial credibility entirely. I meticulously printed, highlighted, and cross-referenced the document with the previous evidence I had gathered. Each layer of deceit he had built was now visible, undeniable, and ready to be presented in court. Meanwhile, the emotional toll of the custody battle weighed heavily on me. Marisol had become quieter, more withdrawn, and Theo's clinginess increased with each visitation. They were absorbing Brendan's manipulations, unknowingly carrying messages that distorted their perception of me. One evening, after a particularly rough visitation, I sat on the edge of my bed with Theo in my lap, Marisol curled against me, and I let myself cry. I cried for the years I had lost, for the innocence stolen from my children, and for the betrayal that had shattered my family. But even in that moment of despair, I felt a flicker of determination. I wasn't just fighting for custody anymore, I was fighting for the children's understanding of truth, love, and stability. Every document, every witness statement, every court filing was another step toward reclaiming their lives, and mine. Regina helped me organize my evidence into a comprehensive, unassailable presentation. We mapped out financial records, social media posts, witness statements, and visitation logs. Every piece had a purpose. Every detail was essential. Then came the breakthrough. A conversation with a former colleague of Brendan's. She revealed that he had been receiving additional compensation and perks, all hidden from the court. Her statements, combined with the internal memo I had discovered, painted a damning picture of deliberate deceit. Brendan had not just manipulated finances, he had weaponized them to maintain control, to paint me as incompetent, and to isolate me from my children. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the evidence we needed. The truth was finally within reach. But as the next hearing approached, I knew Brendan would not surrender easily. His desperation made him dangerous. Every interaction became a calculated risk. I documented everything meticulously, ensuring that no manipulative tactic went unnoticed. When the day of the hearing arrived, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Brendan's smirk was gone, replaced by a tight, controlled expression. Constance and Paloma sat behind him, their faces masks of calm, but I could see the anxiety in their eyes. I presented the newly uncovered evidence with clarity and precision. The hidden bonuses, internal memos, and witness testimony all pointed to a pattern of deceit. The judge listened intently, flipping through each page, clearly weighing the impact. Brendan's lawyer tried to deflect, argue, and distract, but the mounting evidence was undeniable. For the first time, the courtroom atmosphere shifted entirely. Brendan's confidence wavered, and his family's silent support felt less certain. The judge's eyes were focused on me, on the facts, and on the children's best interests. After the hearing, Regina and I stepped outside. I felt exhausted, but oddly exhilarated. "You did it," she said. "The tide is turning, but stay vigilant. He's not done yet." And she was right. Brendan's next moves would be aggressive, unpredictable, and possibly ruthless. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope, not just for the custody battle, but for the restoration of my family. That night, I held my children close and whispered promises I intended to keep. I would fight. I would reclaim their trust. I would expose the lies. And I would ensure that nothing Brendan had done could erase the love and bond we shared. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than usual. Months of preparation, sleepless nights, and painstaking documentation had led to this moment. Every detail of Brendan's deceit was laid bare, every manipulation accounted for, every subtle lie exposed. Brendan entered first, his once cocky stride now tight and controlled. Constance and Paloma followed, their faces calm but betraying tension beneath the surface. I took my seat, clutching my folders, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything riding on this hearing. Regina leaned close. "Stay steady. Facts first, emotion second. You've got this." When the hearing began, Brendan's lawyer tried his usual tactics, attacking my credibility, questioning my emotional state, and attempting to minimize the impact of the new evidence. But this time, it wasn't enough. I stood slowly, deliberately, and began my presentation. Every financial discrepancy, every hidden bonus, every unreported account, every social media post designed to manipulate perception, I laid it out clearly and methodically. I presented witness statements, visitation logs, and statements from teachers and neighbors who had observed my consistent involvement and care for Marisol and Theo. The judge listened intently, flipping through the documents, occasionally raising an eyebrow at some of the more egregious inconsistencies. Brendan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I saw the first real cracks in his confident facade. Then came the emotional testimony. I spoke about the impact of Brendan's manipulation on the children, the subtle ways he had poisoned their perception, the quiet moments when Marisol questioned my love or Theo clung to me in fear. I shared the small but significant victories, bedtime stories read without tablets, small affirmations of love from the children, and the unwavering bond we had built over years of care and devotion. Brendan's lawyer attempted to object, but the judge allowed the testimony. There was weight in my words, and in the silence that followed each statement, the courtroom seemed to recognize the truth. The children themselves were not present, but the impact of their experiences was palpable. Every comment I made about their well-being, every instance of my care documented and verified, created a narrative of love, stability, and dedication that could not be denied. After presenting the evidence, I stepped back, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. This was the culmination of months of relentless work, emotional fortitude, and strategic planning. Brendan's reaction was immediate. He attempted a final barrage, accusations, attempts to discredit witnesses, and challenges to the financial evidence. But the foundation I had built was solid. The judge's questions were pointed and incisive, revealing that Brendan's credibility was faltering under the weight of incontrovertible proof. Constance's face paled. Paloma shifted nervously, unable to maintain the composure she had relied on in previous hearings. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was undeniable. After hours of deliberation, the judge made a series of rulings that sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Temporary custody orders were revised. Brendan was required to provide full disclosure of all assets. Financial misrepresentation would be investigated, and my visitation rights were expanded with clear guidelines and supervision as needed. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt a surge of hope. Not victory yet, there were still hurdles to cross, but a tangible shift in the battle. Brendan's control had been challenged, his lies exposed, and the children's well-being acknowledged as the paramount concern. Outside the courtroom, Regina hugged me tightly. "This is huge," she said. "You've turned the tide. Now it's about consolidating and protecting what's been won." And while the legal battle was far from over, I knew something important had changed. I was no longer powerless. I was no longer isolated. Every small act of deception, every attempt at manipulation had been met with evidence, preparation, and resilience. In the quiet moments after the hearing, I allowed myself to think about my children. Marisol's shy smile when I read her favorite story, Theo's tiny hand clutching mine in reassurance. These were the moments that reminded me why I had fought so hard. Brendan had underestimated me for 8 years, and he had continued to underestimate me throughout this ordeal. But his mistakes were now visible for all to see, and I was determined to ensure they had consequences, not for revenge, but for justice and for the protection of the children. That night, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by documents and evidence, reflecting on how far I had come. I had endured betrayal, manipulation, and near destruction, but I had also discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. Regina reminded me gently, "This isn't over. There will be challenges ahead, but you have proven you can face them and win." And I believed her. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to envision a future where my children and I could rebuild our lives, where love, truth, and justice prevailed over deception and control. I was ready. The final hearing felt like walking into the eye of a storm. Months of strategy, sleepless nights, and relentless effort had led to this moment. I entered the courtroom with a folder of evidence thicker than any I had brought before. This was my last stand, not just in court, but for my children, my dignity, and the life Brendan had tried to destroy. Brendan arrived, his usual arrogance faltering. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw, the subtle twitch in his hand, the tension radiating from his posture. Constance and Paloma followed behind him, their smiles forced and brittle. Even his lawyer seemed aware that the tide had shifted irreversibly. The hearing began with Brendan's final attempts at deflection. He questioned my emotional stability, my financial management, and even my parenting. But every argument he made was countered by the mountain of evidence I had painstakingly compiled. Hidden accounts, unreported bonuses, documented financial manipulations, witness statements, and detailed visitation logs, all of it painted a clear, undeniable picture. Brendan had lied, manipulated, and weaponized both money and perception to isolate me from my children. I presented everything with calm precision. Every document, every testimony, every carefully tracked interaction between the children and both parents was laid out systematically. I spoke about the emotional toll of his manipulations, the ways he had subtly poisoned Marisol and Theo against me, and the efforts I had made to maintain their well-being despite his interference. The judge listened intently, flipping through pages, asking pointed questions, and occasionally pausing to ensure the gravity of the evidence was understood. Brendan's lawyer attempted to interject, but the impact of the documentation was overwhelming. The emotional weight of the courtroom lifted slightly when I addressed the judge directly about my children. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady but heartfelt, "I have dedicated my life to these children. Every meal, every bedtime story, every school project, every scraped knee. I have been there. And despite every attempt to manipulate and isolate me, I remain their mother. I am not perfect, but I am present, I am committed, and I am fighting for their lives and hearts." The courtroom was silent. Even Brendan, seated across from me, looked uneasy. His confident veneer had been stripped away. Constance and Paloma shifted uncomfortably, aware that the narrative they had supported was unraveling. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the decision. Temporary custody was revised. Marisol and Theo would spend equal time with both parents, with clearly defined schedules and protections to prevent manipulation. Brendan was required to provide full financial disclosure immediately, with oversight to prevent future deception. Additionally, a professional family counselor would mediate interactions to ensure the children's well-being remained paramount. I felt a surge of relief, but also a sense of triumph. Months of relentless documentation, emotional resilience, and careful strategy had turned the tide. Brendan's attempts to erase me, to rewrite my story, and to manipulate our children had failed. As the courtroom emptied, I approached Marisol and Theo, who had been waiting quietly with their school counselor. They ran into my arms, and for the first time in months, I felt a profound sense of reunion. Marisol clung to me, whispering, "Mommy, I missed you so much." Theo buried his face in my shoulder, sobbing quietly, and I held them both tightly, feeling the weight of the months of separation melt away. Outside, Regina hugged me. "You did it," she said. "You fought, and you won, not just for yourself, but for your children." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "It wasn't just me," I whispered. "It was for them. Everything was for them." In the days that followed, Brendan attempted a few minor legal maneuvers, but the court's scrutiny, combined with the mountain of evidence against him, ensured that none were successful. He tried to influence Paloma, but even she seemed to understand that the tide had turned. I began rebuilding my life. The small studio apartment that once felt like a prison became a sanctuary. I saved carefully, began working additional hours, and slowly rebuilt financial stability. I invested time in nurturing Marisol and Theo's emotional recovery, focusing on love, stability, and consistency. One evening, as I tucked Marisol into bed and watched Theo drift off to sleep beside her, I reflected on the journey. I had been betrayed, humiliated, and nearly destroyed, but I had survived. I had faced manipulation, financial sabotage, and emotional warfare, and emerged stronger. I was no longer just a mother fighting for her children. I was a woman reclaiming her life. Brendan's attempts to control, manipulate, and erase me had failed. I had exposed the truth, rebuilt trust with my children, and secured a future for us free from deceit. And as I watched Marisol and Theo sleep, peaceful and safe, I felt a sense of profound victory, not just for the legal battle, but for the restoration of love, trust, and family. I am Aelia Selenas. I survived betrayal. I survived manipulation. I survived the darkest months of my life, and today I have my children, my dignity, and my future. The fight had been long and painful, but in the end, truth and love prevailed, and nothing, no lie, no manipulation, no betrayal, could ever erase that again.